Outside the Box Reviews, we are taking a look at the Diamond Select Godzilla Minimates Wave 1. And I was so happy when I heard they were doing this. As a Godzilla fan, one of the great things that has come out of this American reboot of the franchise has been the fact that all these different companies are going and picking up Godzilla licenses, doing Godzilla figures, and the Minimates line has always been one that has caught my attention. They cover a lot of different properties, and I've already reviewed some of their Universal monsters and some of their Marvel superheroes from the movies. So when they said they were doing Godzilla, I was over the moon. In Wave 1 here, we have, starting from left to right, Titanosaurus from Terror of Mechagodzilla. We have Godzilla himself. We have Gigan from Godzilla vs. Gigan. And we have Mothra from like half the movies in the freaking franchise. And I have to say, starting off, this is a very weird Wave 1. Godzilla, obvious. They pretty much had to hit him. Mothra is definitely another obvious choice, being a character that's very well known, probably almost as well known as Godzilla. But Gigan and Titanosaurus, these are both characters from the 1970s era of Godzilla, which is very nostalgic for me. Not that I was alive back in the 70s, but those were like some of the first Godzilla movies I ever saw were some from the 70s era. And I know Titanosaurus has a cult following. I've always loved Gigan, but it just seems like a very strange place to start. Well, let's not waste any more time. Let's take a look at how Minimates managed to turn giant monsters into little minifigures. We'll start off by taking a look at Mothra, and this is one of the type of characters that Minimates tackles that always amazes me, because they take their standard Minimate body and they do something completely different with it. If you look at Mothra from the underside, you can recognize some of the main parts of a Minimate figure. We have the head up here, we have the main torso, complete with the arm ball joints on it, but beyond that, they've given us some unique parts to really make this look more like a moth than a human. On top of that brown head, as you would normally have a cap that would have maybe some hair or a helmet, we have the full-on Mothra head sculpt, and I think they did a decent job with it. This is definitely depicting the Showa-era Mothra. It has very muted colors throughout, and I like that. It's more, to me, the classic Mothra, not the very fuzzy one that we got in the 90s, and I really like the more modern versions of Mothra, but this is definitely very classic looking. It has some great antennae on it, little hint of a weird jack-o'-lantern looking nose, some beautiful blue metallic compound eyes, little mandibles down here, a lighter yellow on top of the head. The rest of the head's just kind of this beige, but it does have the fur sculpted in, which is nice. And then we let the plastic of that brown head underneath kind of accent the colors on the bottom there. The top of the boxy little body kind of continues on that paint scheme. Instead of being sculpted in hair, it's now painted on with little black lines, which almost makes me wish I would have done a black wash on the head just to make those all even out, because later when we get to the bottom here, which I forget what part of a bug that's called, but it's back to being sculpted lines. But here in the middle, it's actually highlighted in black paint, sculpted in yellow fur and everything like that. As I mentioned before, this back section, all the different little compound segments of it, with very hard to see sculpted in hair, because this is all just that beige color. There's no real paint variation. And the beige between the two sculpted sections in the midsection is definitely a slightly different color. On the underside, we continue that brown stripe, so we have the head, and it comes down to the mid-torso section, which is actually a clipped-on part, but the torso itself is painted that brown as well, and then a little splotch of it down here on the lower part of the body. We also have the legs sticking out from here, all 6 legs tipped with a little beige foot. The wings on this figure are what really shine. They're beautifully done, beautifully painted. I just love the amount of detail they've put into them. It's very iconic Mothra, and all different colors in here, ranging from that very dark orangey red to a nice yellow to more of the beige to even a greenish down here at the bottom. Very well executed, and a very similar pattern up here on the top. So looking at the wing here, I was going to praise it for the fact that it actually kind of curves down at the tips and looks like it's actually being affected by gravity and has some weight to it. But looking at the other wing, I realize now that it curves up at the tips. So it's just the same mold of a wing and they used it twice. That's a little disappointing, because I like how this looks over here with the droopiness, and having it just inverted on the other side, not matching, is a little bit of a bummer, a little bit of a cheat to me. Mothra also comes with a little display stand. It's mostly translucent plastic. It kind of has a beigeish yellow color to it, which I think might actually be unintentional. There's also a little spot of black on mine, but that's a minor nitpick. But this will peg onto the underside of Mothra. Unfortunately, not very well. I mean, it's definitely on there, but it's very easy to knock her off the stand. It's not a very deep hole in her torso. It really can't be because of the way this is sculpted. sculpted. It's just a little raised up section that clips onto the standard Minimate torso, so it really can't go in too far without making a whole separate Minimate torso for this to work with, but I kind of wish they would have done that because it just doesn't stay as much as I'd like it to. It's a decent flying effect. It has a slight curve to it, so you can have her kind of flying upward, or spin around, have her dive bombing, or have her moving to one side or the other in kind of a banking move, which is a neat touch. For articulation, we do get a ball joint at the base of the head, which actually has a very good range to it. Pretty impressive what they got out of Mothra's head here. We also have ball joints at the wings. Not a whole lot of movement up and down, which is where you really want it, but decent enough. They will also rotate, but there's no real reason you need to do that for the character. And then we really just have a slight swivel back here at the lower part of the body, and that's it. Nothing in the legs, nothing anywhere else, but it's pretty much what you'd expect with Mothra. You really just need the wings to move and the head to move, and you're pretty much set anyway. Now the next three figures, Gigan, Titanosaurus, and Godzilla, all come with their own little standard Minimate base. I'm so happy they are finally including these with all Minimate figures. I wish they would have done this from the start because I really need some for my Universal Monster set, and I've been stealing from my Marvel and the one Walking Dead set I have, but these are a lifesaver when it comes to displaying Minimates. It just has the one big peg there that will fit into their foot and stabilizes them. And while Gigan is a goofy character choice, I love that they did him, and they did him right. He looks very, very cool. They gave him his big silver hook arms, which look great. He's got kind of the folds of skin here on the bottom where it transitions to the rest of his arm. Now these, one of them on mine was a little stuck when I first got it. I did have to heat it up with some warm water and get it to move, and it's still kind of stiff, so do be careful when you get this guy out of the package. Don't force the arms. You might end up breaking something when you're first opening it up. The head sculpt on Gigan is pretty well done. They put a lot of good detail in. He's got the red little visor here. He actually has a tongue sculpted and painted inside of his mouth, which is great. The silver beak and the silver side jaws on it. Some gold scales on his throat, and the ridge of spikes on the back of his head. Some more gold at the base of the neck coming down onto the rest of the body. Of course, we line that up, it all matches up. He's got his 3 rows of fins, which are very nicely done. They're kind of almost lime green, which I believe they were still gold in the movie, so it's a little odd that they didn't make them gold to match the rest of the figure, but they still look nice. There's some good sculpted detail in them, some little kind of crinkly lines in the bones themselves within the fins, all tipped at a nice silver. The paint is very clean for something this small, which is very impressive. He's got his tail coming down the bottom here, more spikes on top and tipped in a spike as well. That gold paint is just fantastic. It's a very nice, shiny, vibrant gold, and the silver is also very shiny and metallic looking, which is very cool. Coming around the front, we have his giant pot belly with the sharp row of chainsaw spikes going down the front, which is very cool looking. Still can't get over how nice those gold scales are, and of course filling in all the extra space with the green. As you can see, this is a kind of extra torso that goes over the standard Minimate body. Kind of similar to what we got with the Hulk and Iron Man figures, but this is much larger than that because it includes the tail and the fins and all that stuff, but it's basically the same idea. The upper legs have a nice cap on them to bulk them up, and then we have his little Gigan feet with his single sharp claw of a toe, and of course peg holes at the bottom. The one thing I found interesting with all these kaiju, besides Mothra, none of them actually have the head. I thought maybe this would be a cap over the standard Minimate head, but this is a separate piece that connects specifically to this body sleeve. So this over piece that goes over the standard Minimate torso that I talked about actually has its own ball joint at the top where this head connects. So it's almost a little cheating for Minimates. Not that I'm too keen on them having to follow the rules, because who cares as long as the figure comes out well, but it's an interesting change up for them. So for articulation, we just get a swivel at the neck. And while I did say it is a ball joint in there, all we really get is a swivel out of it. So no up and down movement. We have a ball joint at the shoulder, so you can move in and out, forward and back, a little bit hindered by the extra little bit of sculpting here on the shoulder, but not too bad. Hinges at the elbow. We can rotate at the part of the arm right below the hook. He theoretically has waist articulation in there, but you can't get to it because of this bodysuit. His legs can barely move forward. They can move back a bit and side to side because of the ball joint in there. You got a bend at the knee and a swivel at the foot. No articulation anywhere else, nothing in the tail or anything like that. Next up, we got Titanosaurus, and he's constructed much the same way as Gigan, the head over top of this special little bodysuit made for the underlying body here. Once again, caps over the upper thighs. The head on here is really nice. He has a very long neck on him, which is very unique to this character. Titanosaurus is a really tall kaiju, so he's a very interesting design. He's got his little fin ears and a little mane going down the back. He almost kind of looks like a seahorse. He's got his antenna sticking out the top, just plain old yellow eyes. Got some white teeth sculpted and painted in there. A nice bumpy texture to all of his skin, which is very iconic to the character. That continues down onto the bodysuit as well as this fin on the back. And then here at the very bottom, we have his tail. His tail is in the full outward fan pose. In the movie, it actually is normally closed, and then he flips it open for fan mode, and then he can wiggle his butt back and forth and blow Godzilla around. Going down to the arms, we actually see the warts or the bumps are painted on as black circles. So similar to what Mothra had. It's a little weird because it goes from a sculpted detail with no paint apps on it to being a painted on application. So a little strange, but it still works on this character. He's got his little 3-clawed hands going on. These are the standard kind of C-clip hands with some extra detail on them, so he theoretically could hold any Minimate accessory if you wanted. The chest is nice yellow, more smooth than the rest of the body, kind of looking more armored. Coming down, as I mentioned before, he has the caps over the upper thighs with some good detail on it. It actually has some muscle kind of painted in there along with the bumps, lower legs, and then his sculpted Titanosaurus feet. His articulation is exactly the same as Gigan, so I'm not going to go over it again. Same exact detail there. Last but not least, we get Godzilla, and sadly, this is the one I like least from the set. I just think the face is not very Godzilla-esque. This looks more like a generic dinosaur, and I feel like they were going for that goofy 70s look, which they do kind of capture, but it just doesn't look right to me. The other monsters are actually fairly accurate for being a Minimate, and this just doesn't look very much like any Godzilla suit I can really think of. So it kind of bums me out. I wish I would have gone with something a little more Godzilla looking. I don't know, maybe you guys disagree with me and tell me I'm wrong in the comments, but I just don't feel it looks like Godzilla. The paint is decent though. You got his eyes, he actually has pupils painted in there, white teeth and a pink mouth, so some good paint there. The overall body is a nice charcoal gray, which I like. They tipped all these fins in the back here with a kind of a bone yellow kind of color. I wish they would have done more of a bluish hue and on the spines themselves too, just to make it more Godzilla looking. The body has some slight kind of lines sculpted through it, and they painted them onto the arms, and it's definitely much more noticeable on the arms than it is on the body. The body, it almost kind of gets washed out. He does have the 3 rows of spines in the back, the center row being very large, the outer rows being very, very tiny. Continues onto the head and onto the tail. He also has the smooth underside to the tail, which is a nice attention to detail there. He's got his 4-clawed hands. Once again, the Minimate C-clips, which are able to hold whatever. And then 3-toed feet, which is accurate to a lot of the Godzilla movies from this time period. More of that painting on his legs to give out that scaly texture. Then he has this kind of splotch here in the stomach, which is kind of sculpted separate from the rest. And once again, the exact same articulation as we got with the other two. I feel like in the course of this review, I voiced a lot of complaints about this set, but overall, I actually really enjoy it. 3 of the 4 characters are incredibly well executed and very accurate, especially being in this stylized, very tiny scale. You have to remember, these figures are only about 2 inches tall, so this is a lot of detail crammed in a very small amount of space. It's a praise that I gave to the Minimate figures back when I reviewed the Iron Man 3 ones. They put in details and have a character selection that Hasbro wouldn't touch. And I partly wonder if that's the reason for this odd character selection here. Gigan and especially Titanosaurus are characters that don't get touched that often in the Godzilla universe. They may be fan favorites, they may be cult classics, as it were, but they are not ones that the general public knows about. Mothra and Godzilla, definitely. Gigan, not a whole lot of people I'm sure are very aware of him, but he was in 3 of the movies. Titanosaurus, it was in only 1 film, so he's the most obscure of the bunch. I really wish the sculpting on Godzilla was stronger, but this thing definitely gets a recommend, the cult classic status, whatever it is. I always forget to actually give it that cult classic title for Giant Monster Monday, but that's what it is. And I really hope Diamond continues this series. They've already announced Wave 2. Wave 2 is going to give us another Godzilla, which is basically this exact same Godzilla over again with some blue spines and fiery breath coming out of his mouth, which, while I'm not a huge fan of this version, I'm excited enough for that version just for that cool change up. And then we are going to get a Mecha Godzilla, a Hedorah or the Smog Monster, and Jet Jaguar. So once again, they are hard hitting those late 60s, early 70s movies, putting out two characters that are pretty well known and two lesser known characters. So I am excited to see this series continue. I'm hoping we get several waves, but my experience with Universal Monsters taught me that I tend to really favor the Minimate lines that don't live on as long as I feel like they should. But seeing the era of characters they're giving us, definitely think we need a Megalon in there. I really like an Anguirus, but that's just me being a huge Anguirus fan. But yeah, definitely some quadruped characters would be pretty cool to get. I know they've done quadrupeds before, so I'd like to see more. If you're interested in picking these guys up, your best bet is your local comic shop or an e-tailer. These were not available at stores like Toys R Us, as far as I'm aware. It was really only online retailers and comic shops that carried them. And I had to search pretty hard. Actually, 2 of the 3 comic shops in my area sold out of them. So hopefully that's a good sign for this series and they'll continue to be made. Make sure you check me out on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. Also check me out on Facebook, link below. And until next time, this has been another Outside the Box Reviews, Giant Monster Monday. Stay tuned for more to come.